This story happened to me back when I still lived at my parents' house. I was commuting to college at the time and had 3 siblings that also lived at home, my brother and 2 sisters. For some context, we lived on 5 acres in rural Ohio, surrounded on both sides by woods and farm fields. Additionally, during the week, my dad normally left for work at 2 a.m., so I had always felt like it my job to be the man of the house because he was gone during the times when you would imagine something sketchy happening. However, on this night, because it was the weekend, my dad was home. I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice trying to get my attention. We had separate rooms upstairs, and coming out of our rooms you could look down over the banister and to see our front door. When I woke up, it took a few moments to get out of the haze and realize what was going on. I looked at the clock and it was around 2:30 a.m., and my brother told me there were 2 men at our front door. Now this really woke me up. We quietly walk out of my room and peek over to look down at the front door. When we looked, there was no one at the door, but I noticed my parents off to the side, out of view of the glass on the front door. I whispered down to my dad, and he told me there were 2 guys who had been talking to each other and knocking on the door. Hearing my dad say this freaked me out even more. I went back into my room and grabbed my pistol, quickly shuffling down the stairs after looking to make sure they weren't at the door. If they had been, they would have easily seen me coming down the stairs as it is in direct view of the door. My brother is right behind me as we head over to where my parents are, whispering to try and find out what is going on. My parents had awoken to the sound of our dog barking and had come out to find these 2 men knocking loudly at the door. At this point, the men return and begin knocking again, despite the fact that no one had come to the door and our dog was still actively barking. The fact that they were there at this time, in a location where houses are spread out hundreds of yards and still knocking with the dog barking, made the situation even more terrifying. After a couple of minutes, the men walked away, and we all shuffled across the kitchen into the family room to peek out the windows into our driveway, which is lit up by our outside light. There was a black Cadillac sitting there, but no one was inside from what we could see. Immediately, the question was, where did these guys go? They weren't in their car, and they were no longer at the front door. Unfortunately, we figured out the answer when the handles on our back French doors started jiggling. They were actively trying to enter the back of our house, which enters into the kitchen. At this point, I just remember my mom frantically saying, "David," to my dad, as pure terror overwhelmed her. Then 2 things happened. Adrenaline filled my body as I prepared my handgun, horrified at the very real possibility that I might have to shoot these men. Secondly, my dad finally grabbed the phone, called the police, and calmly told them what was happening. Thankfully, after a minute of jiggling, they stopped at the back door and disappeared again, only to return to their knocking at the front. However, at this point, several minutes had gone by, and suddenly we saw the local police fly up in multiple cruisers with their lights on. As they whipped into our driveway and front yard, the 2 men bolted away, attempting to run the long way around the house across the driveway. One of them disappeared out of our view, but the other one was intercepted by an officer yelling for him to get on the ground. He didn't, and he was immediately tased and fell on the ground. Some of the officers went around the house after the other guy, and one of them came to talk to my dad and I as we came out the front. They ended up finding the other man hiding in my sister's little playhouse in the backyard. It appears both of them were drunk and/or high, as the one who hid had cocaine on him. While they were both arrested that night, we never did find out what they were charged with or what happened to them. Needless to say, the whole experience wasn't fun. So, random men at our door in the middle of the night, let's not meet again. It started about 4 years ago when I was living in a friend's house while attending a nearby university. It was myself, my friend, his sister, and their parents. Roughly about 2 weeks into staying there, my friend's sister invited her boyfriend to live in the house too, and by all accounts he was a pretty cool guy at first. very sociable and full of great stories. We often sat around the table for drinks or talked about life, having a smoke in the garden. Within the first month, however, as he started to get comfortable, cracks started to show in this veneer. He would rant about government conspiracy, how he was always a wronged party. He was big into Sigma male bullshit and martial arts, and Christ, did he have a temper. He had this big dog he always kept in a cage that was extremely violent when he wasn't around. The dog attacked his girlfriend and had to be put down. That's when the guilt trips towards her began, and the ranting became incessant. About 2 months later, he had the bright idea to live in a shipping container, mainly because the parents wanted him out, and dragged his girlfriend along for the ride. I'm not talking about one of those cheeky little restoration jobs. This was a rented container, in a storage yard among the outskirts of the town we were living in. He would intimidate and threaten the staff there constantly until they called the police. This, of course, was another conspiracy. He became increasingly abusive to his girlfriend, to the point where the family got involved to get her out of there. I stuck close to them, having pretended to be on his side until we could safely get her out. They broke up, which he blamed me for, claiming I was poisoning her against him to make her mine. She has a new partner now, and they are happy. We all blocked the Psycho X on everything possible, but he continued to harass them until eventually he disappeared. Or so we thought. Fast forward to last year, I started to receive messages over social media from several different accounts, blocking each one in turn when I discovered who it was. Some friendly and some hostile. One of these profiles, however, was pretending to be someone I knew from university. We talked about life and how things were going. I was invited to a house party, claiming it was a free house and plenty of people were coming. I booked the time off work, made my travel plans, and kept talking to this friend coming up to the date of the party. I mentioned it to my friend's sister, and she was interested in going herself, until I mentioned the address, and she panicked. The address in question was a property belonging to the crazy ex's father that was scheduled for sale. I waited until the day of the party and called the police to check the property, claiming a suspected break-in. They found 5 people there, including the ex. Parked out the front was a butcher's van equipped for food storage and a collection of knives, hammers, and rope. I'm glad I didn't go. This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started. It was early 2020, and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, around a 40-minute drive, and my sister pretty much rented it for free to me. I just paid for the water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten used to it. One night after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards my door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up, thinking that it might have been mine since I'm a smoker. But after looking at the brand name, I realized that it wasn't mine and threw it away. I didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off as some asshole throwing it at my curb. I went on with my night, and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts, this time near my porch. Needless to say, I was pissed off and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I didn't know who it was, there was nothing I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, past 1 a.m., so I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood, and it was COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think much of it. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about as their voice seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob being shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to my window to see if they had walked away or changed their mind. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you could move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically stuttered over his own steps as he jumped back. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while I was staring at them, frozen in fear, and trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over my window, locking them and running upstairs to the storage room where I pushed a table up to the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows being shaken aggressively when they realized that they couldn't get in. One of them let out a long, angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. By the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't too keen on staying there so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. I honestly don't know what they wanted or why they were so determined to get in. I'm a girl living in Northern Europe. I won't go in too much detail where this happened because I don't want people to recognize me from this story. This story takes place in October when I had a part-time job in this research center. This was in a bigger city, not like in the middle of it, but it was a 30-minute bus ride from where I lived at the time. Keep in mind that the workplace was in an industrial estate, so the only people that really spent time in the area were the workers from these companies. I worked all 3 shifts, mornings, evenings, and nights, but I did mostly night shifts because none of my co-workers really wanted them, and I'm a night owl anyway, so that 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift worked well for me. This happened on one of these night shifts. It was a Thursday night, and I was one of the 3 workers there that night. We did not work together. We all were in our own departments doing different kind of work, also far from each other in the building. I worked at a chemistry lab doing water analysis. So it was not any kind of customer service job. We were basically all alone, and it got usually really quiet and rather peaceful. We had no security guards, but it was quite impossible to enter the building without an identification card. All doors were locked, and everyone that worked there had these cards where you hold it in the sensor on the door, and it opens. You also got to use the card when leaving the building. These locked doors were not only on the outside, but also inside the building. So if someone somehow managed to get through the first door without the card, they could not get any further in the building, to the labs, for example. The door locks again immediately after you get in or out. Considering that, we never had to really worry about someone uninvited getting in even in the nighttime. This particular night, I took a bus and headed to work. I greeted my co-workers that were leaving as their shifts had just ended and met the other night shifters in the women dressing room. All normal, I was in good mood, and so were my 2 co-workers. When our shift started, we parted our ways and went to different labs. I was 3 hours into my shift at 1 a.m. when I decided to take my 20-minute break. The 2 co-workers had went to their break earlier than me, so I had to go alone this time. Our break room was this lounge where was a couple of long tables, chairs, mini kitchen, and a bathroom. I'm not gonna lie. This big hall with old flickering ceiling lights was not my favorite place to be alone at 1 a.m. when the whole building is almost empty and it's pitch black outside. There were big windows in the lounge, but I could not see anything out of them, just darkness. There was always this same eerie vibe at nighttime, so I was used to it. 5 minutes into my break, I decided to go outside to smoke a cigarette. I put a jacket on, took my shit with me, and opened the door with the card. We had this smoking place in the back of the parking lot, about 1-minute walk from the door. If I said I wasn't scared to be alone in an empty parking lot at night as a young girl, I would be lying. This was the only thing I really did not like about the night shifts, but I really needed that cigarette. Nothing bad had ever happened, and I live in a generally safe country, so I just hoped for the best. There was this nasty white plastic chair in the smoking place. I sat in it and lit my cigarette. From the smoking place I could see clearly to the entrance of the building. There were bright lights above the door. Usually I just stared at that door without even noticing it. I mean, it was a night in industrial estate area, and there were not many interesting things to look at. All of a sudden, I noticed a person walking up to the door. It was a man with trench coat and a top hat holding a briefcase. I had never seen this man before, in my work or anywhere near this place. This man stood still in front of the door, not moving at all, facing the door. Even though nothing seemingly bad had happened yet, just a weird man standing by the door, I cannot even explain in words how scared I was. I had to somehow get past that man to get back inside. He doesn't know I'm there. He didn't see me. What if he does something to me when I'm trying to get inside? Is he trying to get inside? What does he want? And who is he? This was the only door where I could enter the building from outside, so I had no choice but try and ignore that man on the door and get inside. What on earth is this weirdly dressed man doing in this area at 1 a.m.? There is clearly something he wants from us, and I wasn't even sure if I wanted to know what that was. I started walking towards the man in the door while he was still standing, not knowing I'm here in the parking lot. The closer I got, the more scared I got. I had to stop and think again. I knew it was part of my job to confront unwanted people trying to get in and tell them how to contact our customer services. But keep in mind this was 1 a.m., weird man who appeared out of thin air, and an 18-year-old girl alone. I had this gut feeling that I should not go to that door. I decided to call my coworker that was there that night and ask if she could meet me at the door and let me in, so I didn't need to face this man alone. I went and hid behind my coworker's car that was in a parking lot to make a call. I was hiding behind the car in this position where I could still see this man through the car windows. I wanted to see if he leaves and where he goes. My coworker answers the call, and when I start whispering in the phone and explaining the situation, I watch in horror as the man turns around and stares right at the car I was hiding behind. I don't think he saw me, but he for sure heard there was a woman talking behind this car. What happened next is straight from a horror film. When this man found out there was someone behind the car, he started slowly and quietly approaching me, not knowing I could see him through the window. And here's the thing. He did not walk. He did not run. He was on all fours, crawling towards the goddamn car. I couldn't even scream. I just froze from fear and the phone dropped from my hand. When this man was getting closer to the car, I see both of my coworkers opening the door, waving and screaming at me to run and come in. Did not need to tell me twice. I ran inside so fast the man didn't even have time to react when he got up and started running after me. The door was already closed. The second he heard the door lock itself, he turned around and started speed walking away, eventually disappearing into the darkness. We called cops immediately, and they came not long after. They did not find anything or anyone. That man disappeared as fast as he had appeared, and no one has seen him since. After the shift, my coworkers walked me to the bus stop and waited with me till the bus arrived, making sure I get home safely. Forever thankful to these lovely women for opening the door for me before that man got me, and God know what he would have done to me. I haven't done any night shifts after that, and for sure never will. Last year, I moved to another city after finishing high school. I assessed several college options and decided on one that would have me move roughly 3 hours. I found an apartment where I would be able to live without roommates, and that was in a safe part of town with reasonable rent. It was close to some attractions in the city, which was an added bonus to me, as it would still allow me to have a reasonable social life. For the first 4 months or so, it was great. There were absolutely no problems or safety concerns of any sort. And I managed to become good friends with a guy who studied at the same college as me. He coincidentally lived around 5 minutes away from me, so we would often hang out at each other's place. One night, just as winter started, he called me over to play video games and hang out. We had a pretty chill night, drank a few beers, had a good few laughs, and enjoyed ourselves. At around 1 a.m., we decided to call it a wrap, and I headed home to my apartment. When I got back home, I decided to head out to the balcony that overlooked the entrance of my building to smoke a cigarette. I vividly remember looking around and seeing absolutely nobody. It was a cold winter night, and it wasn't the weekend, so understandably everybody was at home. Besides the usual car or two passing by, it was dead quiet. Once I finished my cigarette, I decided to call it a night and got ready for bed. I was understandably confused when I heard a short ring on my doorbell. I stood in the center of my room for a solid few seconds as confusion and a little bit of fear set in. I snapped out of it and decided to tiptoe to my door and to just try and hear if anyone was outside. My immediate thought was that my friend came over to drop off something that I might have forgotten, but I thought to myself that he would have texted me or called. I probably listened for half a minute or so when the person once again ringed the doorbell and softly knocked a few times. I was stood still and didn't want to make a sound so that I wouldn't give away the fact that I was at the door. I heard the stranger pacing around the apartment for a few seconds before he stopped. I waited for any sort of noise, but it was quiet. That was when I decided to look at the peephole to see that he hopefully had left. I picked up the cover of the peephole and took a look. My legs pretty much went numb as I saw a hooded figure looking straight into the peephole. He was holding the zipper of his hoodie so as to cover his face. All I could really make out was his forehead and eyes. He must have either heard me lift the cover or my heavy breathing, because right away he moved from the peephole and said, "I know you're at the door." By this point I was pretty much shivering in fear, but mustered up the courage to say, "I'm calling the cops, man." He laughed and said, "Sure thing, big guy." He proceeded to wipe away the door handle with his sleeve before walking off. I understandably called the police. When they came over, they informed me that I wasn't the only one. He had been doing this for at least a month, and they suspected him of at least one home invasion where a father chased him out the house. I crashed at my friend's house for around a week or so after this, before going back into my apartment. It's been a year and I've never heard of any news about him. He could have been arrested by now, but as far as I know, he hasn't been. I find it more likely that he simply moved to a different area. I'm not sure if he had any violent intent or not, but either way, I'm not waiting to find out. Trigger warning. I came across some information about an old friend. The story mentions murder, but I don't go into much detail. I'd like to apologize for how overly sarcastic this post may seem. Humor is my defense mechanism. Stay safe out there. When I was an angsty teenager, I moved in with my mother and stepdad to escape a less than desirable situation. Because of the move, I was enrolled in a new school. This school was located in one of the sketchiest neighborhoods in the city. Everyone who resided in that area was relatively low income, my family included. We had a rec center near the school that was a hot spot for, let's call them undesirables, which was primarily teenage boys wandering over from the nearby high school to catcall the girls. Lunchtime was my favorite. I loved going outside for chow and having sweaty teenage boys asking for the nasty, note the sarcasm. Anyway, during my time at my shitty school, I made an array of friends. However, there was one person who became my best friend. Let's call her Blondie. She and I got along like, what's a negative connotation? I was a people pleaser and she took advantage of that. Blondie was nice enough, but she was problematic. Regardless, we were fast friends and thus began our very short-lived friendship. Over the school year, she mainly came over to my house since I was an only child. We usually had the house to ourselves while my folks were at work. However, she finally invited me to her house around the middle of the school year. I was super excited. I had always wanted to meet her family since they were always such an enigma. Blondie wasn't one to divulge information about her home life. All I knew was that she lived with her mother, stepdad, and younger sibling. I'm unsure if she was embarrassed or didn't care to share, but I finally had the honor of meeting them. Honestly, her family was amazing. They were kind and treated me very well. Not to mention her stepdad was a phenomenal cook, the best spaghetti and meatballs I've ever had. After that, I started going to her house more and more, and you know what? I really enjoyed it. Fast forward to a month or two before the end of the school year, and it's Blondie's birthday. Her family was throwing a little get-together at their house, and I was invited. Blondie and I headed to her house after school, and it was a really fun time until near the end of the day. Now I knew next to nothing about her biological father. I knew he wasn't really in the picture. He'd sometimes drop by and say hello, but I had never personally met him. That was until he had made a surprise visit to give Blondie a present. When I tell you there was a shift in the atmosphere, I kid you not. I could immediately feel it, and I was a dumb kid. We were inside the living room, eating some cake, and there was a knock at the front door. Blondie's mom answered, and her face, which once had a nice smile, turned into a scowl. If looks could kill, the dude would be dead. She moved aside, and this man walked in. I'll never forget how everyone in the room got tense, except for Blondie, who excitedly greeted her dad. At the time, he seemed like a normal dude, maybe a tad bit on the creepier side, but who am I to judge? Blondie introduced me to her father, and we shared some pleasantries. At one point, I was invited to get some ice cream with them the following day, which I accepted. I mean, I was getting free ice cream. Of course, I was going to say yes. He eventually left, and we all got back to eating cake. I had honestly forgotten about the visceral reaction everyone had upon seeing him. Maybe if I remembered, I would have said no. Anyway, the following day rolled around, and I went for ice cream with Blondie and her dad. I can't remember much from that day other than him asking me if I had a boyfriend or girlfriend, which seems innocent enough, but the way he asked it made me feel weird. I honestly can't remember much from my other encounters with this man. Nothing really jumps out to me. I know I went out with him and Blondie a few more times before my family moved to another city, and we lost touch. Fast forward a few years, and I'm attending college. I had managed to stay in contact with one person from my middle school days. Let's call her Teddy. She had reached out to me one day asking if I wanted to go to a movie, which I happily accepted. I was balls deep in the big sad at the time and needed a pick-me-up. A film with an old friend was just what I needed. I took the train to a nearby mall, and Teddy and I watched the movie. After, we headed to the food court and got some chow. We were catching up. It had been a couple of years since we last saw each other, when Teddy suddenly perked up. She asked me if I heard about Blondie's father, to which I said we hadn't been in contact since I had moved. Teddy's face lit up, and she told me the most mind-blowing story my little brain had ever heard. She informed me Blondie's father had murdered a woman. Now, before I continue, she was going based on word of mouth while she was telling me all the details. Teddy had no news articles or police reports to back her story. She was told by a friend who heard from someone else, and so on. But what she told me wasn't actually far from the truth. According to her, Blondie's father had taken the life of a street worker. He got away with it for 2 years, and his truck got him caught. Apparently, there was something unique about it. Teddy couldn't tell me much more because she genuinely didn't know. I remember going back to my dorm and trying to Google for more details, but I couldn't find a damn thing about it. I eventually forgot about the story until last year, 2023. I was discussing the craziest stories from my life with a friend when I suddenly remembered Teddy's story. After some digging, I finally found an article that described the crime. I clicked on it, and when I saw the picture of the man, well, words can't describe what I felt. Everything Teddy told me was true, but it was so much worse than what she and I thought. Out of respect for the victim and her family, I won't describe what he did. But he was arrested 3 years after he had taken her life. I can't find any information about how he was caught, but it had something to do with his truck. He was charged with manslaughter. He took a plea bargain and indignity to a body and only served 7 years of his 14-year sentence. He had served half already because he was in custody during the trial. I looked him up again not too long ago, and I learned some unsettling information which prompted me to write this post. He was released from prison a few months ago. Guess what he did? He killed another woman. From what I've read, it had similarities to the other murder he committed. This time around, he's charged with second-degree murder and indignity to a body. There's unfortunately still not a lot of information about the second woman, but both of his victims were mothers. They both were cruelly taken from this world, and I still can't wrap my mind around this all. I met this monster. I was best friends with his daughter. I don't think I was personally in any danger, but the fact I met someone capable of such heinous crimes, it scares the living shit out of me. I can't even begin to imagine how Blondie must have felt after learning of her father's crimes. Anyway, I apologize how vague I was regarding the crimes. I know some of you really want to know everything, but it didn't feel right to share their story, especially since it had little to do with me. I was just the schmuck that was friends with the daughter. Also, I would like to provide more information about how Blondie is, but I can't remember her last name for the life of me. She doesn't share the same one as her dad. Regardless, thanks for reading. My workplace is a pretty well-known place. At one point it was slow and we had some free time. So some of our other co-workers decided to look at reviews of our workplace on Facebook for fun. They found a post directly addressing Katie. It went something like, Katie was mean and bullied this customer because of his disability. He also added that he didn't want anyone to tell Katie because he was scared of retaliation from Katie. We knew it was BS as Katie was a very nice person and we could never see her doing this. So we go up to her and tell her about this review. Katie said that she always knew there was a review about her, but she was never able to see it. Apparently, Katie almost didn't get hired because of this review. Yes, you heard that right. A customer left a review of Katie before she even worked at our job. We all remarked at how weird and messed up that was. Then Katie asked to see the review. That's when she gasped. The name of the person who left that review, she had interacted with them before. She started telling us that about a year ago she went camping where they had local Wi-Fi. So she connects to it, and while camping, she gets a random message on Facebook. The message was from the same guy who left the review. The message was something like, "Hey, I saw your phone pop up on the Wi-Fi, and so I thought we could be friends. I live around this area." Katie was weirded out, as anyone would be. She basically told him no. He kept messaging her, so she blocked him and thought that was the end of it. We then were all talking, trying to put all the pieces together of how this guy knew about her working here, when Katie said that she remembered putting on her bio that she always wanted to work at our current job, as it was a goal of her. So what we came up with was that this guy must like to cyberstalk girls who come to that camp. He must have checked out her profile, saw that she was looking for a job here, and made a review about how horrible she was as revenge for blocking him. Katie must not have been able to look at his review, because she had him blocked. Yeah, we were all creeped out at the end. It's been about 10 years since this happened, but I still remember things pretty clearly. I should note that this is told from my perspective, and I wish I could get my mother's perspective on it as well. She just doesn't remember the events as well as I do. For context, I lived in a mid-sized city in the southern United States, where the main thing to do at the time was go to the mall. Sure, we had movie theaters and a couple of bowling alleys, but besides that, there really wasn't much to the city. My mom worked at a department store located in the mall, and having nothing better to do, I would regularly go and sit in the break room while she worked. It gave me a reason to get out of the house, and if I wanted to, I was allowed to walk around the mall or get something to snack on in the food court. Honestly, though, I was shy and preferred to just stay cooped up in the break room, playing video games on my Nintendo 3DS. My mom's co-workers were generally very sweet to me and frequently popped in to say hello or just to check on me during downtime. If I was lucky enough to go with my mom on weekends, I could usually convince my mom to pick up my friend. We were actually dating, but since we were both girls, I didn't want that to get out, to go along with us. Going to the mall meant I was free from doing chores at home, and it was a cheap way to sneak a secret date in every now and then. My girlfriend, though, never really liked staying in the break room with me. She always wanted to walk around the mall. I should note that she really enjoyed taking walks, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to want to do so at the mall as well. I just didn't like walking as much as she did, so I tried to weasel my way out of it whenever I could. I could usually convince her to just walk over to a nearby store and look around or to go grab something from the food court rather than walking, but I noticed pretty quickly that she wasn't trying to actually get me to walk around. She just didn't want to be in the break room. Now, my girlfriend was more perceptive to things than I was, and I assumed she just didn't like the ambience of the break room for some reason. For a little while I let it go, but eventually I got frustrated and asked directly what was really bothering her about the break room. I thought she was going to tell me that it was too cramped or the lights randomly cutting off made her uneasy. The things that bothered me about it too. But no. What she told me was that she heard things in the ceiling, like someone was walking around in there. I had learned from my mother that there was a room in the ceiling, but it wasn't for walking around, it was for maintenance. Most of the stuff in there was wiring and insulation, but technically someone could go up there, so I told my girlfriend this and said it was likely an employee up there to fix stuff. She said that was fine, but she didn't really like it, and still preferred walking around or sitting in the food court. I understood her discomfort and wanted to help, so I agreed. We had a really good relationship in the sense of communication, and though I got frustrated, I wanted to make sure she felt comfortable. Later that day, I mentioned what my girlfriend had told me and asked what they were fixing in the ceiling, though my mom just looked distressed and said they hadn't been up there fixing anything that day. But she wanted me to see something. My mom took me into the receiving room of the department store, which was just a room off in the back filled with boxes and random junk the store was going to put out for sale. The layout of this room, though, was sort of an L shape. One part of the L was used for receiving, but the other part was the way into the ceiling. I should clarify for this next part that to get into the ceiling, the store would have to call for the mall's maintenance team. They didn't have a ladder or anything on hand to climb in there, as it would have been a safety hazard. The only thing that this particular area had was a hatch that led into the ceiling. That was it. So, needless to say, I was horrified to see what appeared to be claw marks leading up the wall to the hatch. I still remember the way they looked, brown gashes that had been dug into the concrete wall of the receiving room. I asked my mom if it was a prank, but she told me that this wasn't the first time it had happened, and she had no way of knowing I would even ask about it. According to her, these weird carvings had shown up several times over the course of a few months. Each time, the store would call in the mall's security and maintenance teams who would clean the wall up and then go into the ceiling to investigate. Nothing had ever come of their searches, though, and they eventually gave up dealing with the marks. The only explanation mall security could give was that it was likely a homeless individual who had made their way into the ceiling by sheer willpower and happened to be very good at hiding during the searches. I stopped staying at the mall with my mom after that, and any time I wanted my girlfriend to come over, we found somewhere else to go during the day. Sometimes she'd just come over to my house and we'd watch TV or whatever, but I didn't feel safe going back to the break room after that. I knew nothing had happened up until that point, but I just didn't want to risk it, honestly. My family consists of only me, my mom, and my stepdad. This happened 2 days ago in Singapore when I was asleep in my room while living with my parents in a small apartment. I have my own bedroom as I'm an only child. My parents took the smaller room, and I had the master bedroom, which has a big window that is facing the back of our house. For my bedroom, there's a big space outside our windows that's between every apartment unit over here, so there's no way someone would unintentionally stand near my window. You have to walk in and go for a few turns before coming here. I eventually fell asleep around 11 p.m., and I forgot to close my blackout curtains for my window. It's a frosted window. Anyone can see through it if they stood a closer look. Exactly at 1:23 a.m., I heard 3 loud knocks on my room window, which eventually woke me up as I'm a very light sleeper. At where I'm sleeping, my window is on the right corner and I can see whatever shadow that gets through it at day or night. On that night, I didn't switch on any of my lights, so it was total darkness, except for my table lamp that was shined at me at highest brightness. At first, I was sleeping while facing my room door, which is on my left, so I had an automatic response to turn my head and looked at what's knocking on my window. To my surprise, I saw a silhouette of a man's head that was clearly visible on my window. Despite my parents' room being right next to mine, I went into shock and had to call my mom to help me check if I was imagining things. I told her what I saw. In the end, she advised me to sleep in the living room for the meantime to calm myself down. I felt really uneasy that night. I couldn't go back to sleep. Since I stayed awake that same night, I heard 3 more knocks coming from my bedroom at 3 a.m., which of course I had to assume it came from the window. Before this happened, my curtains were already closed and blocking my window's view, so I thought that it'll be fine for me to go ahead and get a little look on who or what knocked on the window. The only difference this time is that the knock was louder but slower, like the ones you would experience as if you're in an old haunted house. Come to think about it, until now, I wished I stayed curious and stayed in my living room. I had my face in hand holding onto the window since I had to get a closer and clearer look since I didn't saw a silhouette when I was standing from a distance from the window, and me still being paranoid from what happened hours before. I saw a man around 1.80 meters tall, frozen in place, standing and staring straight right at me outside my room window. He was wearing gray long pants, a black t-shirt, and had a really, really pale skin. It looked as if he had no expression when he saw me. By the time this happened, I wasn't really sure if it was the same man that stood outside earlier in the night. As much as I was tired that night, I knew I wasn't hearing things or seeing hallucinations. I was perfectly wide awake when I saw that creepy unknown man. Moral of the story: always check your windows before falling asleep, and best to get a blackout curtain to protect yourself. Of course, guard your window with protective measures. Over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in the small town that I'm from. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically, and I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation that I'm about to tell you. This changed the way that I developed friendships after that job. That's for certain. So I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2018, which was odd to me, and I had no kind of high expectation of the job. All I wanted was to do my job, get paid, and go home, as I had 2 children at home and many things that I could work on there. The job wasn't hard and it made pretty good money for all duties considered, so I really couldn't complain. I worked second shift for about 5 months, and I went to day shift. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly until, one day, I met someone from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. For the sake of anonymity, we'll name him JF. Well, JF was a pretty good guy, and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night, and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook. Again, another oddity. So I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work until he suggested that we should hang out, so we did hang out. Pretty frequently. We were friends for a month at this point, and one day he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, Super nice, didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. One time we were talking at a restaurant and he started to vent to me. Dude, she's such a bitch sometimes. The other day I forgot to take the trash out and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a relationship where someone's threatened me, but she's got good intentions, dude. When he said that to me, I was concerned, but, of course, we had only been friends for a month, so I thought that maybe he was being morbid jokingly, so I chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking. She really did." That concerned me. Fast forward about 8 months. They're still together and we all hang out pretty regularly, forgetting the things he told me then. One day we were all talking and he seemed a little off that day, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude. I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me, though. He had them on her when I asked that. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Do you promise to keep this between us?" Of course, I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her and she went a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you then, no one will." He said that he diffused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out, man. If you need somewhere to go then, you can come stay with me until you get her out of the house." Fast forward to another year. He finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time, he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him, and he was actually out of work that day with a vacation day. He sent me a text that said, "Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me." That struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come to our job and she asked me where he was, and I said, "I have no idea. I thought he was with you and you guys went out of town or something." All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I called him and told him that she came by, and he called the police about it. They had found her up the road with a loaded gun in the car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he had something to tell me. When he called me, he asked if I had seen her around, and I hadn't. He said, "I would take some vacation days if I were you." Dumbfounded, I asked him why. He said to me, "Because she's out of jail and her cousins are in town trying to find the people she has personal vendettas with. You're one of them." At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and went out of town. Took 2 weeks off of work. Come to find out, that next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. I got the news about it the day after it happened. The reason why he knew they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that they shot. The 4th name on that list was mine. After they found the evidence and he decided to go public about the group and screenshots that he had, they were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for, because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided to not inform anyone else on it. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore and I dodged a bullet. Stay safe, you all. If you like this story and want to see more, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video.